De Nieuwe Liefde. Huis voor taal.
Welcome to the audio stream of Love in Colour. My name is Eliza Anyangwe and I am a writer, editor and moderator based in Amsterdam. On Sunday, March 27, 2021, at the Nieuwe Liefde, I sat down with the best-selling British-Nigerian author, pop culture expert, and self-proclaimed romcommoiseur, Bolu Babalola, to discuss her first novel, the short story collection called Love in Colour. In this lightly edited recording, Bolu and I discuss her writing process, her background, and the enduring power of love. Enjoy. Can you just take us on a little bit of a history tour of Bolu Babalola? Who are you and where are you from?
I'm British-Nigerian. I was born in London, grew up in London, but I've been going to Nigeria at least once a year since I was 7 years old. It's often twice a year. Now I'm in Nigeria can be in Nigeria for 5 months of the year. It's very much my home. So, and my parents are very specific about that because they didn't want me to grow up with a complex of am I English, am I British, am I Nigerian? No, I'm comfortably both. I feel very, very Yoruba, very, very proud of being Yoruba, and I feel British as well. And I think that comes up in my work. It's just part of me, and I can't even imagine writing a protagonist that isn't initially Yoruba, because that's just me and that's the world that I know. And
so for those of us who are not familiar with what that means to be Yoruba and how that might turn up in, what does it mean to you to be Yoruba?
Tonight we're very proud people. The best, super talented, super gorgeous. I'm not joking, but yeah. We're an ethnic group in Nigeria, Southwest region. I guess that's the Wikipedia. But it's just, I don't know, the storytelling tradition, I think, is very much part of me. And our language is so poetic. We're such an emphatic people and an emotional people. And we feel everything very deeply, and we're very expressive. And texture, taste, sound, everything that comes up in our language so poetically. And I think that comes up in my work. Everything is described. I'm very big on vivid imagery, and Yoruba is a language of vivid imagery.
Okay, but I also want to know about where it doesn't work in terms of the creative tensions in your own, because we all have them, right? What part of the Black British and the Yoruba are button heads? What part of the writer and the girl who wants to be loved on, whatever, where are the tensions within you?
That's a good question. You know what? And all of my Yoruba...
So London there. You know what?
Yeah.
Listen, yeah.
A lot of my Yoruba protagonists, which is most of them, struggle with vulnerability. Because, Yoruba women, we're very proud. We don't want a man to see us soft, We don't want them to see us tender. We don't want to be hurt, right? And we don't want to be made a fool of. But the thing about letting love into your life is that it demands vulnerability. You have to be innately vulnerable. And that's something that I struggle with. And I think something that a lot of my characters struggle with. That's where it butts heads. And I think also, maybe that's also Britishness and Yoruba-ness coming together, because British people, but they're more stoic in that. But yeah, I think that's where the romantic in me and the Yoruba in me clash. But I don't know if they clash or they work together, because I call it discernment. Okay, so am I going to be soft on the go, on the fly? No, you have to work.
I'm going to be soft, but I'm not going to be soft on the fly.
Yeah, you have to work to get at my vulnerability.
I was imagining that when the idea dropped into your head, you had a conversation with somebody about it. What was it that you said to them? How did you describe what became Love in Colour to that person?
So actually, I was working on what is now going to be my second book, Honey and Spice. When the idea for the anthology came around, I was thinking of doing an anthology, and my editor for the British publication came up to me and was like, I think you should write a book of love stories. And around that same time, I was thinking the same thing, because the thing that propelled me into kind of my literary career was a short story, and I've been playing with that idea for a while. And I thought it was going to be a kind of taster menu for my own writing. So actually, I really thought it was going to be an easy task. It was not. I really thought it was going to be an easy task. I was like, okay, I'll just bash this book out and then work on Honey and Spice. You do not bash a book out. It's a lot of work. But the conversation was just about kind of, we know Greek mythology, we know Roman mythology, but we don't really know mythology from around the world to the same extent. And I think that's purposeful, because, how do you rob people of their humanity? You take away their stories and their language and stories of love as well. I think love is at the core of humanity. So for me, that was twined. So for me, it was just about centering that and kind of focusing away from the dehumanization that a lot of colonized people have gone through, basically.
That is wonderful, because actually when I think about, as I was listening to you talk, I think about how we have come to be identified as, or how we even start to identify ourselves as you put it, colonized people. Mm-hmm. So people generally from the Black and brown world. And we identify with our grief, with stories of our trauma, stories of our grief, stories of our loss, right? And here is an unabashed attempt to center love and pleasure and play and touch. Did you feel embarrassed? Did you feel like you were putting out into the public something that we don't have an appetite for, or we're not used to, so that you felt a little bit like you were overexposed somehow, in a way that if you were talking about, Black Death, you might not have felt overexposed?
So if you know me, you know I love love. So for me, in terms of that respect, it was just it was easy for me. The one thing that I write is romance. I love romance. I seek romance in the media that I consume. So it was easy for me. And in my life, and with my Black friends, with my Asian friends, we don't talk about death all the time. We talk about romance. We talk about joy. We live our life in a fully nuanced way, as humans do. And so for me, it was not even anything I thought about. When people would ask me, did you find it weird writing about love and love is usually frivolous, did you feel a bit silly? I was like, do you feel a bit silly asking me that question? Because love is at the core of everything, and it's such a formidable topic that for me, most people are doing themselves a disservice by not exploring the topic thoroughly. It's also gendered, isn't it? Because when a man writes about love, he's kind of, look at this. He's in touch with his full humanity. Yeah. Look at him like taking on a serious topic. A woman writes about love and you can only read it on the beach. And you should probably put the book in another book cover so that you don't reveal that it's chick lit, right? And so to be able to be so fully unashamed of the fact that actually love is everywhere, because intimacy is everywhere. And it's not just always romantic. You also have talked about friendship. So how did your view of love translate into the anthologies? Where did you start in terms of finding your stories? So I started with a bunch of different stories, and I read a lot. And it was a case of finding themes that I could work with, and also things within characters that I could work with, strength, generosity, and then also putting the attributes that I admire in women in, like our intelligence, our humor, our tenderness. And it was also important to me to kind of center partnership and friendship in these relationships. So it's not about a man's, obviously because it centers women, but even that was purposeful, because it's not about a man's desire or the capturing of a woman. There's these two people engaging in an attraction and an affinity for each other, and seeing how they challenge each other, and seeing how they work with each other, and it's not romance for romance's sake. It's because these people actually are like, you know what, you will add to my life. And also for women who date men, I wanted that to be very particular, because I'm sorry, a man has to give you a lot for you to allow him to come into your life, because I'm sorry, men are drained sometimes. And so it's like, okay, how can you challenge me, and how can you add my life and make my life sweeter? And all of the women in Love in Colour, I think, are very powerful. And it was very important for me, if they did date men, for them to be men who are in awe of their power and stand next to their power and support their power.
What are the ways in which doing that? I mean, when we talk about it now, and I think we are talking about it with an intelligent crowd who think about things like this, and we take for granted how powerful stories are, that actually by thinking intentionally about how you center a powerful woman, how you turn a fairy tale on its head, because as we all know, the fairy tales we grew up with, I'm from Cameroon, the ones I know are not from my own culture, and they're all cautionary tales about what it means to step outside the lines as a girl, right? Like if you're a girl and you don't do if you're Little Red Riding Hood and you venture off too far, the wolf will eat you, so get married at 16 and have children, right? Yeah. That's the story. And yet here you are, like, taking those same stories and turning them on their heads. You're not just, your publisher in English talks about you decolonizing, but you're also going at patriarchy. You're also, have people come to you and recognize this work that you've done, or as well as just kind of like get really excited about the characters and the stories themselves? Yeah,
from a cultural standpoint, so many people have messaged me saying that they've finally seen themselves represented. And I was very, very conscious of that, because I didn't want to disrespect any cultures. But so it meant the world to me. I remember when I was writing Scheherazade, who her story is Persian, set in Iran. Well, it's based on an Iranian folk story, 1,001 Nights. And I was like, okay, what would an Iranian person eat on a Sunday evening? And I messaged my Iranian friend, and I wanted to get the food right. I looked at the recipe. It's one line, but I just wanted, it just describes a taste, but I really wanted to know. And I stopped short of making it myself, because I just don't cook. It would have been disastrous for that would have been the most offensive thing for me to do. But a Persian person, an Iranian person, messaged me saying that even that seeing her food represented, let alone herself, was crucial to her, and it made her feel seen in the sphere of romance that's often barred from people who are not white, basically. So things like that means a lot. Obviously, things like Oshun, dark-skinned women being loved on and desired and unabashed with their desire. And also people who have kind of related the stories to their own life, in terms of I had someone who was like, I broke up with my boyfriend because of you. And I was like, I'm so sorry. She's like, no, it was a good thing. He was a bad guy. He was a loser. And I was like, okay, good. I am glad that my stories are torchlight to show you that your boyfriend is a loser, and that, we deserve better. We deserve the desire, the love that we seek, and to be seen and to be held, and to center friendship as well in our relationships. And I've had people message me saying that they read the introduction at their wedding, which is that's wild to me, and it's so moving, and it's just beyond what I've imagined for the book. I think my readers have really given Love in Colour more life than I imagined for it. I'm so grateful.
I asked Bolu to read a couple of bits, and you just mentioned Oshun, so we should do that one. But before you read it,
okay,
I want to ask you, because I'm so curious, whether in the process of writing it or afterwards, how did it change even you?
Well, I think that it reified what I look for in love, because in writing the book, I was forced, when you're writing anything, you're forced to look inward. But I was really forced to look inside my conception of love, which I knew, it's all there, but I had to break it down on a molecular level. And I was like, okay, what I really desire is friendship and humor and to be seen. But also the story that I relate to most is Orin. It's actually really funny, because when I wrote Orin, all my best friends messaged me, was like, oh, this girl's you. Because, she's not like nicey nice. She's not mean. She's got a playful streak, and she seeks a man with a playful streak, but it's also in awe of her. It's like, yo, I follow you on Instagram. You're sick. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's what I want.
So that's the pickup line that you...
That's the pickup line. Well, not quite that. Now it's like, I read
you on Instagram and you're sick?
No. Now it's, I read Love in Colour and you're sick.
Oh,
you know?
Okay. Swat up, boys.
I pre-ordered Honey and Spice and you're sick. Yeah. Now it's that. But yeah, it made me realize that. And even in a recent relationship, it made me be like, oh, you are not what I want, actually. You know, you are not giving me what I want. And I think that having that confidence to love yourself, because a lot of the women in Love in Colour love themselves and they're on a journey to love themselves. And it's like, sometimes they're like, you know, I can do without you, but I want you. One of my favorite lines is Neleli, and that's kind of a teenage love story. And Kossi's like, oh, you think you're better than my friends? And she's like, I am better than your friends. Because even though she has that insecurity, she has this strong sense of self. And for me, that makes being alone better than being partnered with someone who's not right for you. So I think going back to those stories made me realize that. Or maybe I think I knew that, but it affirmed that for me.
Fantastic. Let us listen to the little segment from Oshun's story.
Erinle's gaze made Oshun's blood blaze beneath her skin. I don't know you, but you've been in my mind. I guess just not in the same way. Not in this literal sense. Oshun tried to swallow her curiosity. She wasn't used to the taste, as she rarely found what men said to be interesting, but it rose back up to push a question from her lips. In which sense, then? In the sense of a young man wondering about the woman who would one day hold his heart. Oshun found it in her to roll her eyes, to conjure the semblance of dismissal, despite the fact that every cell in her body thrummed with the knowledge that this man wasn't speaking with regular flattery. This was not an attraction tethered to how her being in his possession would make him feel. He spoke plainly of her power over him, and he didn't cower, didn't puff up his chest to overcompensate. And how do you know that's me? Erinle shrugged in a matter-of-fact manner. How do crows know when an earthquake is about to happen? Oshun raised a brow. So you sense your destruction? Erinle laughed, eyes glinting. I sensed my world about to shift. Thank you.
Beautiful. No, we're not going to do the next one just yet. We're going to leave them on tenterhooks wanting more.
I love Erinle because it's just like, he's just a charmer, isn't it?
Okay,
sweet boy.
So can I just, because who has read, of course, this is no shame or judgment, but it's good to know, like, how many people have read the book so far. Excellent. So that means we're going to sell a good many copies today. That's excellent. But tell us a little bit about Erinle.
I think it's the fact that he sees her, he's like, and also the context is she's with just a very oppressive, intimidating, hyper-masculine guy that most men kind of, you know how men worship other men? It's kind of man that other men worship. It's like, I don't care about him. I care about you and what you want. This is not about him. This is about you. And it's not about the pursuit of her either. It's like, I just see you. And I want to get to know you. And he's very clear about that. But I also sense, I just love a smooth talker as well. But I think with his smooth talking is not unsubstantiated. It's the wine, guys.
There we go.
Yeah, it's backed up.
Yeah.
I like men who can back things that they talk, A lot of men don't. A lot of men can't. So, yeah, I like it.
He literally slips into her he enters into her head in a literal sense.
In a literal sense.
Like, wow.
So where that conversation happens in kind of a dreamscape, and it happens in her mind, but also crucially, she has to allow, he can't enter without her wanting him to be there. And that's, of course, that's...
Consent, boys and girls.
Exactly. And that's kind of a metaphor for, that, and also the fact that, allowing someone to get to know you, because she was letting those barriers down, and she feels a freedom around Erinle that allows her to kind of unfurl spiritually around him and let him see her as well.
I think there's something really beautiful in how you have captured, because, of course, even if you haven't read that story or don't know the original mythology or the stories around it, there's something in the tone that that sets it apart as being from a different time. I felt there was a way in which you use language with those characters, which when we hear the second story Bolu is going to read, you'll hear how different it sounds. Like that is really kind of modern, and you can hear yourself. You know, that's how I speak. And yet the way your choice for language, the language you put in the characters' mouths, how did that language come about? Did they speak it? Did you hear it in your mind, or did you think, actually, I want this person to sound more regal or more noble, or how did you come up with their words?
It's the strangest thing with these stories. Like, I would figure out who my girl is. I call them my girl like a creep, but they're all my kids, I don't know, my sisters, I don't know, my children. And I'll figure out who she is, and she would speak to me, and she would speak. And maybe I'll figure out that Oshun was like regal, and she's a bit imperious, and she has her guards up. She may seem cold, but she has a tenderness that she's actually trying to protect. And once I figure out those themes and factors, she just speaks. And so, yeah, that was all her. Or maybe I just have multiple personalities. But yeah, no, probably that. But no, that was all her. And I think a lot of the stories are dictated by the characters first, and they flavor the tone and the atmosphere of the story.
So before you guys all came, I was saying how the pandemic has changed our lives, right, in big and small ways, and that this book, of course, was written beforehand, but first came out during the pandemic, and we're still living in a pandemic world. And of course, one thing that has been most transformed is how we express intimacy, because for so long we couldn't actually just touch each other, right? Whether it was sexual touch or a handshake or any kind of way of building those intimacies with people was cut off. But at the same time, a different kind of relationship was possible because we were now allowed these bubbles, right? So we were able to reimagine how to be close with people. Mm-hmm. And I was asking Bolu how the pandemic has shaped her view, because you call yourself a romantic. How do you now see love and intimacies? If you were to write this book now, how would that change?
You know what? I think it would be the same. It really would be the same, because it reified for me that all of this is important to me.
Absolutely.
And now I just kind of hold it tighter and hold it dear. And I kind of, love is kind of my compass. And now it's even more of a compass. And now I think I'm more, in a weird way, I was softer about love before the pandemic, and now I'm more strict with what I seek and my boundaries. And I'm more quick to be like, actually, you know what? This is not what I want, and I cannot wait for something to be what I want. It has to be there. And I think that's how I've always felt. But during the pandemic, I was like, actually, life is short, and I think I don't want to waste time looking for that affection and softness that should already be there. So I think it's just affirmed something that I've always felt again, and just made that stronger in my mind.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Is this on?
It is indeed.
Thank you very much for the really interesting beginning. I'm already very into the evening. I had a quick question. How do you navigate, or what's your opinion about love navigation in the digital age? Because we just talked about the pandemic, and a lot of love stories, and not only just like romantic relationships, but just friendships and family relationships. Everything has shifted in the sense that it's a lot more digital. And I was just wondering what your opinion is, or what your thoughts are about the change, I guess.
That is a great question, not least because every last person I've dated over the last 14 months, I have met on an app. So that the start of that story is exactly the same across all different. We won't get out to the point is, it's all digital. Yes.
That's so funny you should say that, because I've never done apps. I don't like apps, actually. I did try them, but then I think conversely, there's a pressure almost that apps must work for everybody. And I don't think that's true. I think it really depends on your personality. For me, an overthinker, a romantic who writes fiction, I'm looking into this picture of this guy and I'm like, his eyes are dead. I don't think he loves his mother. I'm making all these projections and I just don't think it's healthy. And I also hate small talk. Like I just hate and the thing is, romance is already a little bit of a performance, but when it's in real life, it feels a little bit more of a dance and more exciting. And when it's over the app, I just feel like it's distilled to like almost its worst parts. I don't know. It just feels very clinical, right? And it's so draining. And then also, you know, as a Black woman on apps, there's even more stuff that you have to sift through. And it's just exhausting. And then I think one time I tried it and I was like, what am I doing? It's like I'm online shopping and it almost like dehumanizes people. That being said, I do know people who've got married off of an app. And I know people who have found real connections over apps. So that's why I say it depends on the situation. But I think there's also power in knowing if it works for you and if it doesn't. Because I know people that like just get depressed by using it. I'm like, you don't actually have to do it if you don't want to, you know? It either works for you or it doesn't.
So beyond the apps, to the question of just sort of like our digital lives, how are you navigating yours? Let's take it away from your character and imagine your own...
In terms of connections?
Yeah, all your intimacies.
Actually, so away from apps, it's been a blessing in many ways because, of course, me connecting with friends and family that are away from you during a pandemic, but also I've connected with so many amazing, genuine friends through the internet. Some who I've never met, some who I met after we've established a friendship of like 1 or 2 years of chatting online and I'm talking through Twitter because when you're like a Black woman in a certain space, it's really hard to connect with other Black women in a certain space or people like you in a certain space or women in general in a certain space, and you kind of all go through the same things. And I find that the digital space has contracted the world, and so you connect with people that ordinarily you might not have connected with, and you build a community that you might not have built without it. So, and it's been a blessing for me. Like some of my best friends to this day that I've met in adulthood, I initially met on Twitter. And when people ask, like, you know, they see me and my friend Al and they'll be like, oh, how did you meet? We don't remember. And they're like, oh yeah, like you DM'd me once, or you followed each other for a while and we got a sense of each other's personalities. So it's been great. Now it's kind of a different world. I don't know, because I was on Twitter like years ago, and now it's kind of shifted to a darker place, I feel, and a less, not that the internet can ever be pure, but like a less pure place.
In this commercial capture, right? And it's moving away from kind of like connections where in the early days of Twitter, you would say, someone would follow you and you'd be like, hey, thanks for the follow. I hope we enjoy engaging with each other.
It was so
now,
sweet.
You don't thank them and you don't want to follow them back because it is now not about network, but about influence. So the bigger the gap between the people following you and who you're following, the more influential you are, right? So it's not about engagement in the same way.
No, and I'm very fortunate that I just started Twitter because I wanted an outlet to let my voice out, basically. So I was very much myself. I'm still very much myself. I do not pre-plan tweets, but it means that my followers, for the most part, are very genuine and very cool people because I just talk about things I love. So it's been actually a very kind of joyous space where I can celebrate good things.
That's wonderful. And I think we need to remember that, like with your work, writing about love, not everything is dark. That in these spaces, there's still opportunity for light. But you have to, I guess, you have to guard yourself and know how to navigate it.
Absolutely.
So, let's take another question. Come on. That was a great start. Any more from the floor?
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
I was wondering if you're ever going to write about your own love life or intimacies?
No, never.
A very correct question. This is a correct question. Right.
No. No.
No, never?
No. I would never write directly about my love life, but also I just feel like as a fiction writer, you pull from your own life all the time. So how do you know haven't already read about my love life? You know what I mean?
Buy the book and guess which one is her.
Exactly. I've already told you. It's kind of tucked into the book. So if you were listening, that's a test. No, I feel like one day I'll write memoirs when I'm like much, much, much older. But no, because I feel like that muddies the water because I feel like I'm a romance writer and I don't feel like like I need to expose my love life to be a romance writer, and I don't want people to project from my real life onto my fiction, because that's when it becomes invasive. So no, like I don't feel like it's really necessary.
At what point do you tell a new date what you do?
They normally already know. Not gonna lie.
Because he's following you on Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that was his pickup line. He was like, I follow
because
you
he said, I love loving color. I was like, okay, now I'll date you.
Obs. Okay, that was a silly question.
Yeah.
Should we take a third and then we can have a second reading? Yes, over here. Oh, Rivka, you're doing the most. Look at you
Getting those steps in.
Who was it?
I had a question because you said you were first very soft on love and then you became stricter on love and your interpretation of love. But I was wondering if because I think a lot of people think they have a strict interpretation of love, or they're very strict on their boundaries and things, but how realistic is it for each individual? Because I'm just wondering how much you're influenced also by your surroundings and expectations that are made of love. So I was just curious by your own comment saying that you became much stricter. I'm like, what does that mean, and how honest we can be about our level of strictness, if that's motivated by our own wants or something that we pick up from people around us.
I mean, it's based on an individual. For me, it was like original standards that I have about love, looking at my parents, who their stories in the book, but also myself and figuring out what I want. But a lot of that comes from experience and growth and self-knowledge and confidence and loving myself more, basically. And I feel like I don't know for other people, but as I've gone into my 30s, I've become so in love with myself. Like, I feel like it's so powerful for Black women to be narcissists. I feel like we should all be narcissists because the world doesn't love us enough. And and as I love myself more, and I'm like, why would I be with somebody who loves me less than I love myself? You know, it has to match or be more. You know, so that's what I mean by becoming stricter, because I'm like, there's no room to look beneath words or actions like, oh, maybe he meant this or maybe this. No. Like, go on what's on the surface, okay? Because we are not excavators. We should not labor to find a man's affection. It should just be present and tangible. So that's what I mean by stricter, because I'm like, I don't really have patience to be doing that, you know, the emotional work of finding out if a man really likes me deep down, even though he's not quite acting like it, you know?
I think if I may, can I abuse my power on the stage and jump in on the question? Because when you were asking it, there was something you said about sort of teasing out, like, how do you know in yourself? I think this is really interesting, because actually, can we ever really? And so much of how we live in this time is intellectual, whereas actually so many things just need to be embodied, right? Like, I'll take a really obvious example, particularly as we're talking in the context of race. If you're a person of color who only dates, for example, white men, you could ask yourself, ooh, can I put my finger on the why of that and try and change it? And perhaps there is some value in doing so. But at the same time, in this short life, are you going to be able to pass out what is motivated by socialization and what is what the heart wants? And at the end of the day, just live your fucking life, you know? So, you know, there's a certain amount of like how we can try and learn ourselves and grow ourselves, but we don't exist outside of ourselves. And we certainly should not be just in our heads. We should also be embodied, right? So if your experience with people is kind of like, actually, I don't like how this is feeling anymore. And then you're like, actually, I need to make some changes. And then you're calling it stricter. I'm here for it, because to the degree that we only see a couple of steps ahead of us, make some decisions and then live your life.
Internal work is definitely valuable, and it's definitely worth like unpacking some things that we've been socialized to think, especially if we think we're harmful to other people. But also trust your feelings, I think, as well. I think that's very important. But also, again, that comes with growth and confidence.
Absolutely. Can we do the second reading?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So it's a very different story. And it's just right from the start of it. And I really love the sound of this character, and I hope you enjoy it too.
When you bump into an ex-boyfriend... Oh, sorry. It's called Tiara. Tiara's top tips. When you bump into an ex-boyfriend in public, perform the say hello and go. Make it cute and graceful. That way, you're the bigger person. shake their hand, maybe give them a kiss on the cheek and a trite flat, "How you been? Long time," and leave. While I am on the subject, unfollow and mute all ex-boyfriends, and if they just so happen to be a famous heartthrob, definitely do not Google their name at 10 p.m. on a Friday night out of morbid curiosity, because you might learn that they are currently in your city after being away in LA for 19 months. Not that anybody is counting, for an award ceremony. I squinted at my laptop screen. I wasn't sure this was precisely what the magazine meant when they asked for some quick bullet point tips for publicity for my memoirs. Tiara's top tips based on an advice Twitter account that unceremoniously blew up. My agent had dubbed it an eat, slay, love type memoir, encapsulating both the zeitgeist and the young millennial black girl. The idea of having to be all that kind of exhausted me. I wound my finger around the elastic hanging from my 2-pound lacy knickers and tore it off. I was sat cross-legged in bed in an oversized shirt, phone open on Instagram, laptop open on Word. A spaced out, 2-inch long chunk of writing blinked at me from the blank screen. I had been shoveling dry granola into my mouth, my stress comfort food of choice, the evidence of which was present on my keyboard. I tried to blow it off. This was pathetic. Why was I so stressed out? Yes, the man I thought I was going to marry was back in the country after nearly 2 years, but why was I letting that small, inconsequential fact distract me from my work? I couldn't believe I was letting my ex-boyfriend risk the security of my bag. Moneys before honeys. No, men weren't honeys. Scratch that. Fees before the D. Contracts before phone contacts. Those were all terrible, and I cannot believe someone is paying me to write. I opened up Instagram to distract myself.
I felt really seen by that.
I felt really seen.
Felt so seen. I was just like, thank you for that. That was wonderful. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how the characters come to you, but it's a collection of stories. It's an anthology, and as we just heard, you've written in very different styles. Tell us about that. I want to know a bit about your process as a storyteller. What is it to write in so many different styles? Do you feel confident about them all? Were any of them just kind of like, oh, this one is an album filler? Like, did you feel like
I can't say which one I felt was an album filler.
Don't tell us which one. Don't tell us which one. Just tell us how you navigated that.
It was, I don't know, because it was just like, it just felt right when I was writing them. I'm trying to think of if there was one that I tried a voice and it didn't work.
Or a style, like some are like almost diary entries, and like, you know, you've got the top tips. Then you write in the anthologies full of different styles.
I think that Neleli, I tried it not in first person, and that didn't work. And then because when I really thought about her, and I wrote like a good chunk of the story, I think in third person, and then when I looked back at it, I just didn't feel sincere. I felt like I was trying to make it something that it wasn't. And when I let it go and let Neleli lead the story and let her be her bubbly, teenage self, the story came alive in that way. Sometimes it's just about feeling it out. Sometimes you have to work at something, realize it doesn't work, to realize that what does work, I call Love in Colour kind of like a taster menu, even though it's so much more than that, and it's grown to so much more than that, because I feel like it was a homage not only to love and my reverence of love, but also the reverence of romance itself and as a genre in media. And I really got to explore, it's such a privilege to explore, the different subgenres in romance. So you have like the high school romance, Neleli, and you have like the adventure kind of Game of Thrones kind of fare with Sia. With Oshun, you have a historical romance, fantasy romance, magical realism, Afrofuturism. Atem is my take on a historical romance. You know how you have the Regency tons and like all of that kind of Edwardian stuff and Victorian stuff. That was my take on that, because I'm like, historical romance is so much more than kind of that English kind of Anglo Bridgerton, which is what I'm binging at the moment. I don't know if you can tell. So yeah, which I am enjoying. It's so much more than that. It's so nuanced and so broad. So yeah, I really got to explore different genres, and it was really fun to see kind of myself refracted in different prisms, and my voice refracted in different prisms, because it's all my voice. The one that's more similar to my kind of like everyday rising voice, like Honey and Spice, is Tiara and Oren, the last two stories. But it's so interesting because I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. You know, I got to challenge myself in a way that I might not have ordinarily done.
What you've just said made me think of how, you know, who you are, where you have come from, how you identify in all the different ways turns up in your work. Can you just take us on a little bit of a history tour of Bolu Babalola? Who are you and where are you from?
I'm British Nigerian. I was born in London, grew up in London, but I've been going to Nigeria like at least once a year since I was 7 years old. It's often twice a year. Now I'm in Nigeria for can be in Nigeria for like 5 months of the year. It's very much my home. So, and my parents are very specific about that because they didn't want me to grow up with a complex of like, oh, am I English, am I British, am I Nigerian? No, I'm comfortably both. I feel very, very Yoruba, very, very proud of being Yoruba, and I feel British as well. And I think that comes up in my work. It's just part of me, and I can't even imagine writing a protagonist that isn't like kind of initially Yoruba, you know, because that's just me and that's the world that I know. And
so for those of us who are not familiar with what that means to be Yoruba and how that might turn up in, what does it mean to you to be Yoruba?
Tonight, we're very proud people. Like, I mean, the best, super talented, super gorgeous. I'm not joking, but like, yeah. And we're an ethnic group in Nigeria, Southwest region. I guess that's the Wikipedia. But it's just, I don't know, the storytelling tradition, I think, is very much part of me. And our language is so poetic. We're such an emphatic people and an emotional people. And we feel everything very deeply, and we're very expressive. And texture, taste, sound, everything that comes up in our language so poetically. And I think that comes up in my work. Everything is described. I'm very big on vivid imagery, and Yoruba is a language of vivid imagery.
Okay, but I also want to know about where it doesn't work in terms of like the creative tensions in your own, because we all have them, right? Like, what part of the Black British and the Yoruba are button heads? What part of the writer and the girl who wants to be loved on? Whatever, where are the tensions within you?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? And all of my Yoruba...
So London there. You know what?
You know what? Yeah.
Listen, yeah.
A lot of my Yoruba protagonists, which is like, I mean, like a lot of, like most of them, struggle with vulnerability. Because, you know, Yoruba women, we're very proud. We don't want a man to see us soft, you know. We don't want them to see us tender. We don't want to be hurt, right? And we don't want to be made a fool of. But the thing about letting love into your life is that it demands vulnerability. You have to be innately vulnerable. And that's something that I struggle with. And I think something that a lot of my characters struggle with. That's where it butts heads. And I think also, maybe that's also Britishness and Yoruba-ness coming together, because British people, but they're more stoic in that. But yeah, I think that's where the romantic in me and the Yoruba in me clash. But I don't know if they clash or they work together, because I call it discernment. Okay, so am I going to be soft on the go on the fly? No, you have to
I'm
work.
I'm going to be soft, but I'm not going to be soft on the fly.
Yeah, you have to work to get at my vulnerability.
Interesting. All right, guys, we are nearly at time. So if there are any more questions in the room, I would love to hear them. Bolu would love to hear them, I'm sure. There is a hand right there near the back. Someone who I hear slipped into town, and, you know, we want to...
Hi, sis.
Hi. Awesome. Hey, my question is around, you talked about you read a lot in sort of trying to decide what stories to sort of adapt or cover. What stories didn't make the book?
So they were all mired in patriarchy and violence, even the ones that did make the book. But some of them I was like, oh, I don't know how I can how I can do this without totally tearing the story to pieces, at which point I might as well write a different story. There were some stories where I'm like, oh, this would actually be better as a novel. And if I was going to make it, because that's another thing, the stories have to work as a short story. And I would worry, I didn't want to do something for the sake of making it into a short story, because that would do the original story a disservice. There was also the aspect of my research. So for all the stories that I did a lot of research, not just about the story, but culturally as well. I really wanted it to be as precise as possible without actually flying to the countries. And there's some stories where that just wouldn't work. I would actually have to go there and do just possibly have a master's degree in the culture in order for it to be any good. And I just didn't have the time to do that.
That's really interesting, actually, about because I don't think everybody is as thoughtful as you have just said you are in terms of representing another culture in some creative way, right? The fact that you would look at a story and think, I don't know enough about this culture our libraries and bookshelves are full of books written by people who passed on through in a gap year or had 3 months and they didn't feel this kind of way about it.
Yeah. I think
me.
it's because, I'm from I hate it when I watch, for instance, a show and there's a Nigerian character and the accent is off and you can tell there's something off in their name or where they say they're from matched with it just doesn't. I hate inaccuracies. And also I just think it's just disrespectful to take a story from a culture and not pay proper respect to it. Even in Nigeria, there's one Yoruba story, but there's one Efik story, which is another ethnic group in Nigeria. And that's a different nation to me. Just because I'm Nigerian doesn't mean I can just do that without research. So, it's very important to me to pay respect to where I'm taking these stories from.
Are there any stories? Because I think, especially now to the point about being connected and digital, where everything can be accessible to everyone. Do you have a view on whether they should be? Are there stories that we should keep to ourselves?
That's a good question. I don't know. Do you know what's interesting, though? When I was researching the stories, I found so many parallels with stories from around the world. I think there was one in Japan that was very similar to a South African folklore story. And what it really signified to me was the connection that we have globally and the connection that we have emotionally as humans, and how within our diversity, and we are very diverse, beautifully diverse, we're also the same fundamentally in how we see love and connection and family. And why does love always pop up, in these stories? Why does patriarchy always pop up in these stories? It happens both ways. So I'm not sure, because the thing is, if we see all of these stories, I think we will understand each other a lot more and understand that, we are fundamentally all the same, different, but the same.
There's something you did there, and I don't know if you did it intentionally, but I'm going to ask you the question. Okay. You said, why does love always pop up in these stories? And why does patriarchy also pop up in these stories? And that they're both there. Do you imagine love as the opposite to patriarchy?
True love, I think, yes. In a way. I don't know if it's opposite to patriarchy, but I found that... Actually, yeah, maybe it is, because in my version of love and how I see love, it's equality, right? It's partnership, and it's two people coming together. And they might not always be man and woman, And so I do think it is, because patriarchy, honestly, and also I think it also affects men, not just how they treat women, but how they treat themselves. They put so much pressure on themselves to be this kind of provider, protector, all of that stuff, and it shuts them off from tenderness and allowing them to care for, but also to be cared for themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. All right, final questions from the room. Any more? let's take yours, but I'm going to challenge the handful of men in this room. Usually we're like, boys, it's okay. You don't need to say anything. But actually, because it's a conversation about love, and in this context, the framing of it as masculine and feminine, I welcome, it would be wonderful in the spirit of differences of perspective to hear your voices too. But let's get that question, please.
Thanks so much. I was so captured by how youthful your voice is and your writing is, and all of the language that you use and in the characters. And I was wondering if you set out to do that, if you feel comfortable with the sort of the label of the fact that you're sort of speaking for the millennial generation, and if you had sort of anecdotally received that from the audience. Like, I'm wondering how older generations respond to these stories as well. Thank you so much.
A lot of them really, really love it. I think also because I'm writing diverse stories, a lot of them have not seen themselves represented in that way. It's weird because it's like generational. I get these messages from people. Someone said I bought it for my granddaughter, but I ended up really loving it. I think it's millennial because I am a millennial, but also because of the way I see romance is quite millennial, and also the stories are like, centered on women, and I would say it's quite feminist. And so I don't think I set out for it to be that way, but I think it ended up being that way. But also I wanted it to be a universal story. So our generation's reading it, but also school kids are reading it, which is actually, that's almost meant the most to me, because I kind of made it, my usual writing is a little bit more racy, but I made it a little bit more accessible in that way, and some people just don't like to read racy things. And younger kids, teenagers messaging me saying that it's made me realize that I don't need a boyfriend actually right now. It's not like I don't have to have a boyfriend right now because boys are stupid. There's no boy my age that can give me what I want, and that's meant a lot to me too. So it's actually been across the board.
Yes. Brave soul. There's pressure in this to now be really, really good.
Let me do the men a favor in the hall. I think I just want to do men. How many of us are here? Not much.
They will catch your tears at the end. Don't worry.
It's working. Okay. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry I've not read your book, so I'm going to buy one. And my question is more about the future generation. Mm-hmm. Most of us here are parents, and we nurture these kids, men, boys, to become men. What would be your advice to parents who are bringing up boys? What should they teach them for the future of love?
That's a great question.
It's a great question. I am not a parent, so, I don't want to speak on behalf of parents. But I think I also get messages from men as well, and boys. And I think it's just being unafraid of tenderness, really. And how they treat women and other people, but also how they treat themselves, other men, other boys, but also themselves, and allowing themselves to be vulnerable. I think love has a much more graceful way of showing itself when you are softer with yourself and you allow yourself grace and you allow yourself that vulnerability. And it's an exercise that not just young boys, everybody needs to work on. I, as an adult woman, need to work on. It's a constant, and sometimes when you think you've learned it, you can unlearn it very quickly. And so it's that constant exercise of it's okay to hurt, it's okay to show that you're hurt. And sometimes strength is, it's a cliche, but it's so true. Sometimes strength is showing your vulnerability, because it actually takes a lot of inner confidence showing this, what you may perceive as weak, this weak spot of me, this weak part of me does not diminish me as a person.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful answer. I think often about in my work, because I write about gender inequality, and I think about systems, thinking about, for example, how capitalism and patriarchy related. And this idea, for example, that we are all our productivity. We're the thing that we do, and the things that can be extracted from us. It makes me feel really sad, actually, when I think then about what is expected of men in a world in which they're just what they can produce, and that they don't even get the label of provider or carer. I mean, we need to be more than that as women, right? That kind of like the care dividend that we carry, but that a man is just, his value exists only in a marketplace. And that is, I mean, for me, a source of deep sadness, because then how do you then value yourself as anything more than that which you do, and the need to be in control? And so, I think so much about how violence is related to that, and if being extracted from in the streets and then extracting in your private spaces too.
And dehumanizing as well, because dehumanizing to men themselves, but also how they see women. Because if they're just a provider, the women are just there to receive and to take.
Absolutely.
And they have no value beyond that either. And so that's
bearing those children.
Exactly. And so that's causes problems in the dating sphere, but also an extreme way, the violence, the oppression, abuse, coercion.
Okay, let's have one last question. Oh, hello, you work for the organization, so I can't not take your question.
Thank you so much. My question is about the writing process. Can you give us some advice or whatever? How did you go through it, and what will be your golden tip?
I cried a lot and drank a lot of coffee.
Crying and coffee.
Crying and coffee.
Right, got it.
Again, it's about grace and just being I can't be productive if my brain is hitting a wall. And, I'm kind of a workaholic. I'm Nigerian. We're overachievers. We're very just much it's also an immigrant kid thing. And I'm the eldest child as well. There's so many layers to that. But I think it's also giving myself, because it's easy to be just write. Yes, you have to do that, obviously. But you also have to give yourself a break. So I would just give myself time to binge watch something I really love, reread something I really love, just turn off. It's kind of like rebooting your system. I just had a break and I went away for a little bit. We're still working, but just being in a different environment meant that all my creative muscles were given the rest they needed to operate fully again. And they did. So many ideas came to me when I wasn't forcing them to work,
I'm going to ask two final questions. The first is let's go through a quick catalog. I'm starting late. So we started late. So I'm y'all going to sit around for another 5 minutes. Let's go through a quick sort of checklist of things that you've been binging of various varieties. What are you listening to?
Lucky Day.
What is Lucky Day?
He is a very sexy R&B guy. I love R&B. R&B is my genre. I listen to R&B and soul and neo soul when I write. And what you don't like R&B?
Oh man, God, I'm just no, not this thing again. The tropes, it's all no, I don't like R&B.
Really?
No. I just got onto what is it? Anthony who? Anthony Hamilton, yes, who's from the... Yeah, I'm just listening to him and it's not so bad, but no, R&B is...
Oh my gosh, that's the most offensive thing anybody's ever said to me.
Evening end, sorry. Everyone.
I just heard vomiting sounds from the corner of the stage. What was going on?
It's so saccharine. But anyway,
soul, neo soul, R&B. Lucky Day, who's just brilliant. And so if you love D'Angelo, it's like a modern version of D'Angelo.
Ooh.
And, as a romance writer, R&B is so romantic, and so I love that. So I've been listening to that.
What are you watching?
Oh God, I am binge watching Bridgerton because it's just so much fun. And I used to read Julia Quinn books when I was younger. I love historical romance, so been binging that. It's just fun.
What are you reading?
What am I reading? I'm actually reading it's a proof, so I don't know if I can say it yet.
If it's already approved, then...
No, I can't say that one yet.
Okay.
But I'm also reading People Person by Candice Carty-Williams.
Really great. Okay, so my last question is one because we have... It's on we're here for the occasion of your Dutch translation. People who are going to read this book are going to read it in Dutch. And we've been talking so much about, we've been talking so much about language. How do you feel about having your work translated? And what would you like for people who don't have, because you wrote it in English, so there's something that isn't going to be in that new version, but there'll be something else. What would you like people who read in your book in Dutch to take away from it? What's the essence of it?
Hope, I think. Hope and the beauty in romance, and the fact that romance is not a frivolous, silly thing. It can be fun and enjoyable and light, but that doesn't mean it's something silly to be shrugged off or diminished. It's really strong. It can be a steely thing, and it can define how we treat other people, not just romantically, but other people generally. And I think if we have that at the core of our lives, I truly believe that it can make us better people, which may sound very simplistic, but it's truly what I believe. But yeah, hope and joy, I think.
Hey, it's Eliza again. Thank you for listening to the audio stream of Love in Colour that took place at the Nieuwe Liefde. I hope you enjoyed listening to Bolu and I discuss the importance of African female storytellers, the genre of Black love stories, and the preservation of folktales and oral traditions. If you enjoyed listening to this audio stream, do share it with your tribe wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to the Nieuwe Liefde channel. Bye for now.